The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everyone, we're not fully getting started yet. I just want to see, can you guys... Can you guys hear me all right? Is that better? What's going on here? Sound back? All right, someone give me a message. Let me know. Now we can hear me. Okay, cool. I'm back. Sorry, guys. I already started talking. The thing was not on for some reason. All right, so back to where I started from a minute ago. The layers. So the layers in BobCAD are a completely different kind of setup now. Not really too much different. For those of you that have used the layers previously in the past, it's pretty much the same. You're not going to really notice too much different. It is a little bit how you kind of work on it. Give me 2 seconds. Let me just X out all these things. Not that. You guys sent me so many messages just now. I got to clear them so I can see what questions. All right, cool. So layers are over here. I have it placed on the right side of my screen. You can mount it over here where it normally sits. If you'd like, I just wanted to give myself more, a larger layer box. And especially, it seems like lately I've gotten a lot more of you guys. When I jump on your computers, you guys have been moving your layers over onto that side. So I've kind of been growing into that as well, which is real nice. I like it. It gives you a big separation between the two. So layers will work pretty much the same way they've always worked. If you want to treat the layers the same way, you can. It's the same as with the CAM tree. So for those of you that are using version 31 and actually running this thing, the best thing about it so far is it's like there is multiple ways to create layers, and there's multiple ways to create toolpaths. But if you have a way of doing it from a previous version, like if you use version 30 and you had a specific way you did it in there, that way still usually works almost exactly the same. We've just added more ways to get more functionality. So right here, hold on, we got one more guy. I can't do anything, not connected to audio. Oh man, I'll have to get him afterwards. So right here's the layers. We have these buttons up at the top now. So not just creating layers by right clicking like we used to. If you want to, you can. So you just right click inside the layer box, and in here you have the add new layer function. You have the active layer, which is going to let you move the active layer around. You can move layers up and down, which is something you couldn't do in the past, just to reorganize. For me personally, what I'll end up with at some point on almost all my drawings is a junk layer. Excuse me. And on the junk layer, it'll have, I usually want that at the bottom. It's the layer I don't want to work with. And so what I do is I can now move it to the bottom, because sometimes I make it and it just doesn't work. So I just have to I just have to move it up and down. I want it at the right position, so I can move it based on these buttons now. Show all layers is just going to turn on all the layers. Hide all layers is going to hide them. Show a layer is just going to show a single layer. Hide layer is going to show hide just a single layer. And then you can delete your layers as well as rename your layers. One little note about deleting: you can't have any geometry on the layer when you go to delete it. It's not going to delete if that's the case. So if that happens, you just have to open up the layer. And what I do is turn all the other layers off except the one I'm trying to delete. And then on the home tab here, you can just say, I want to just go into select mode. I want to pick all, and then just hit delete on your keyboard and then trash it, because that should usually go. Great, Nick. I'm glad you got sound finally. I couldn't talk to you, so it was tough. All right, so you guys got the layers. It's all pretty straightforward. So when we get in here now, we can add new layers. So we add a new layer. I'll call it lines. Now, what's cool with this is I can give this layer attributes. So something in the past that we didn't have the ability to do was, you could change your drawing color at any given time. At any point in time, you could always go down to the bottom of the screen. You could change your main drawing color, and everything that you draw from then on out would be that color. But with the layers now, you can actually check this button that says Use Layer Attributes, and I could actually go in and just change the color from that normal blue to, say, this orange. And if I come in and I just start drawing lines and sketching them, well, it figures my preview color is the same color. But there we go. You can see as they're getting drawn, and when we're completing them, they're going to show up as orange now. Next to that, you also have the style. So you have the line style. So if you were doing things like an open pocket and you wanted to open pocket something out, you can go and turn on the dotted line before you draw the geometry for the open pocket, or if you just need dotted lines for anything. But now whenever I construct a line using this function and using these attributes for the layers here, everything's going to get created exactly as I want. So now if I go change my color, I'll change it to red. We can see it changes the color, and it's still going to be a dotted line. So the layers can help you keep things not only separate from the fact that they're on separate layers that you can now turn on and off as needed, but the big thing is you could change the colors, and you could have each specific layer match colors. And the big thing about this, it was something that I wouldn't do so much in the previous versions, because then it was a lot more switching colors. But now I can go in and I can set up all my layers before I start drawing anything. I could set up a specific color for each layer. The only problem I then have is I have to make sure to put my check mark on the correct layer when it's needed. So I need to make sure that if I was trying to draw dotted lines, the layer that I'm on has dotted lines set. So wherever the check mark is. So if I come up here and I go back to my CAD, now if I continue sketching things, they're going to show up as this blue, because that's the color that we initially started with here. So we have the ability to create our layers, move our layers around, and then to turn them on and off, it's just that little eyeball right there. All you got to do is click that on and off. So anything that was drawn while the check mark was on the lines layer is on the lines layer. Anything that was drawn after we put it back on, like the CAD layer here, all went to the CAD layer. So again, you can move these up and down. You just pick them, you just move them, and now they're switched. There's your delete function. And then again, there is the use layer attributes function. So you have that ability. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, I think I cut you guys off on my whole intro earlier. So I talked about layers. I got a few things to go through, a few things like snap points, some construction geometry, some UCSs, and then we're going to get into some more CAD features like lines and points and all that stuff. So that's just kind of the breakdown for you guys. So the next thing I want to talk about is snap points, because they are not the same in version 31 as they were in version 30. Now, position-wise, yes, they're the exact same, but you get them without having to hold shift now. So if I want to just sketch a line, or if I want to connect two functions together, I can go and hover over this. Hold on, let me turn off that one. That's coming in the future. So what happens now is I'm not holding any buttons on my keyboard. All I'm doing is touching the line with my cursor. And when I touch the line with my cursor, the snap points automatically pop up. So you no longer have to hold shift when you're doing the snap point showing. So it's just going to automatically pop them up. Now then you can click on it, and that's going to snap to it. Actually, I already snapped it over there with this function. Hold on, let me go back to continuous here. So right here, I can just hover over and then click on the point, and it's going to snap onto it. I then have free drag motion here. So I can do everything I want, which kind of leads me into the next portion, which is the construction geometry. If I want to make perfectly straight lines, first thing is I already have a snap increment turned on. It's all the way down here. It's where we set up this 0.0625, and that's our snap increment. So what's going on is where this line is jumping to, you'll see the line on my screen. I don't know how clear it'll be on your guys's, but if you can see where my cursor is currently sitting and then where the line is, it's not even touching my cursor. And it's not touching my cursor because my cursor is in between a point of, a 1/16 of an inch. So where that line is the next 1/16 of an inch measurement. And if I move my cursor up to that, you'll see there's the 1/16. As I slowly move up, it'll automatically jump up to the next 1/16 every time. Same with going left and right. So you still have the snap increment option, but now what we have is the construction geometry, which is the little button next to it. And so if I turn this on, now what we have is all these dotted lines and points that pop up. So we can see right there, there's a line telling me that this position right here is from that position, I can get a straight line right over the dotted line over here. So as I move this around, we can see it start grabbing all these different positions that it can line up with, and you'll just see them slowly pop up. It is kind of annoying, especially when you know exactly where you're trying to work. I don't need it to show me snap points every single time. So it does get kind of annoying when you're working on a lot of lines and stuff. So if that's the case, if it does annoy you like it does me and a lot of other people so far, you could turn it off. It's right next to the snap increment button. You just give it one click and those lines will no longer appear. The snap points are still on. This doesn't control snap points. This is all about the geometry. So what's cool is as we sketch now, these lines will pop up. So if we want to sketch a perfectly straight line, we just have to wait for it to lock into position. So you just want to drag close to that 270-degree position or wherever you're going from. In this case, it'd be closest to that kind of 270-degree or straight down. And we'll see a preview pop up. And that previews that orange line. And then when I go ahead and click, we now have that line. And then I could cancel out. And there is that line. So it's a dotted line, just straight down. But we use our construction geometry for it. It's a tough one. I don't know when you guys will. I mean, construction geometry is always a great thing to have. And it's great that it pops up. It just depends on how often you guys are going to be able to use it and when you're going to be able to utilize it, depending on how much sketching you do. I don't do much sketching for a lot of the parts that I do, so it's not something I do too often. But with Bob art and stuff, that kind of functionality is wonderful to have because you can draw really clean straight lines, very easy and based off just about any other point that you could come in contact with. So, is anyone else having weird vocals on it? Someone's saying that there's some vocals breaking up. I'm sorry if it is. Hold on, move this mic right there. How's that? All right, I'm going to try that one there. Let me know if that makes it any better, Ron. All right, so the next thing I want to look at is the UCSs. Now, this will also bring up some more with the snap points and stuff. So I'm going to go right here. I have a little file here called Custom UCS Example. And the UCSs haven't changed. I mean, they've changed. It looks different, but it really isn't too big of a deal. So if I go over here, my UCS tab, and I have to really specify this because everyone can have a different location for any one of these tabs now. So you can move these things around. And if they do turn off, which I've seen a bunch of guys accidentally do so far, if you do accidentally turn off one of your toolbars, so if you accidentally turn off Bob Art, your Cam Tree, or one of them, just go to an empty spot right here on the toolbar and right click, and you'll see the full list of all of them. So right now, the only toolbar I have turned off is the BobCAD Live, the tutorial startups, that getting started deal that opens up when you first launch the software, unless you've turned it off. And then the measure entity is just that measure entity box that pops up after you measure something. So it's one of the few boxes that I don't need to have up most of the time just because it's not that important to see all the time. So there we go. The thing we want to look at here is the UCS tab. So mine is on my layers tab. So if I go right here, we have our UCS. And by default, we have 3 UCSs. So there's a top plane, a front plane, and a side plane. Now, before I get too far into this, I just want to talk about this plane that shows up. It doesn't show up on the top plane because it's a default plane. That's where we're always drawing from by default from the start. So if I go right here to the front plane, we'll see that this actual plane shows up, and it's this dark kind of purplish color. That's just there to show you kind of where the orientation is for that plane. But one complaint one problem that I have, it's not really a complaint. It just depends on the monitor. I've found a lot of it to be is how well you actually see that plane. On my laptop, it's really dark, even on the same settings that I have inside my BobCAD here. So to lighten it up, if you ever need to, or if you want to, just because you really don't need, to see the whole thing all the time, you can go up to File, and then either Settings Part or Settings Default. Settings Default, remember, is going to affect this every time. So in this case, the Settings Default would allow me to make changes to every file that I do after this, but it will not affect the window I'm currently on. So I'm going to go to Settings Part, and then right here we have our UCS plane display, and you could choose the color of it as well as how much how transparent it is. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this over to the right and hit Apply, and we'll see that lightened it up quite a bit, made it a little easier to see through, which is my main goal here. I really don't like turning it off. There is a lot of guys that do. But if I turn it off, I feel like I get lost sometimes, forget what plane I'm working in, and then I end up having to rotate things to fix them. If you bring it to the left, it will darken it up quite a bit, make it a lot harder to see through. So I'm going to leave it up about there. Looks good. Hit OK. And so again, that setting will only be taken on this one. So if I open up a new file and I make UCSs, it's going to go right back to the color I had it set to before. We also have that side plane UCS. So you got top, front, side. Now, depending on which one of these we are clicked on when we go into the UCS creation function, actually sets up some of the creation. It sets up the next function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it right here on a top plane for now. And I'm going to right click in this box and say add new UCS. Now you also have this little button right up here. That's also to add a new UCS. So now what we'll see is the UCS opens up over here on the data entry tab, or wherever your data entry tab is. And the first thing we're going to look at is the creation option of a snap point. Now a snap point lets you pick a point that it's going to snap to. The problem is with a snap point, when you're trying to make a plane, a lot of times I want to make a plane that's not just a normal standard, flat plane in either the top plane, front plate, or side. But with the snap point, what it allows you to do is basically move your plane up and down depending on what snap point you choose, but also what plane you are using before you click the snap point. So over on the left right now, I'm in a top plane. So the plane is nice and flat right here in the X and Y. So if I was to go in and hover over this, yes, you do get snap points for certain functions off of your solid models as well. And so what I have to do is just hover over this and then click on it. So what that does is it creates a plane that's flat. So it's the same as my XYZ 0 normal top plane, but now it's at the top of my part instead of the bottom of my part. And it's off that corner instead of the bottom middle of that part. So if we want to keep that, we can hit OK. If I hit the X on there, it deletes the geometry. Now if I go to a front plane, so I set it up with a front plane first, and then I go pick the same point, now I'll get a coordinate system and a plane that matches the front plane, but is now moved to that location. So it's still flat. It's just calling basically this front face here 0 instead of, halfway down the part. And then the last one would be side. Same kind of thing. You just clear this out. As soon as you pick one, it's going to automatically jump to that position and snap to it in the orientation based on whatever plane you were in or whatever UCS you were in before you click the point. So leave it on point there and get rid of this thing. So the next one we have is probably the most underutilized function. I think a lot of people jump right past it, and it's a really, really good function for setting up custom planes. So what it gives me the ability to do is set up a custom plane based on 3 points. So I can define the Z first. So we always define the Z, then the X, then the Y. So Z, X, Y is the order we want to go in. So I'm going to hover over this edge and say, this is where my Z is, or not really the Z, but kind of the vertex. That's where it's going to be. And then right over here, I'll pick this point and say, that's my X. And then right here, I'm going to pick this top point and say, that's my Y. And that automatically orients that plane or that UCS to that edge. So now if I was to go and put holes on this part, like where these 2 points are, and I was to do an extrude cut, it's not going to be an extrude cut based on the arc being flattened to this, an arc coming out this way. It's going to be an arc that's normal to that surface. So the big thing here, and it's the thing I always forget, especially if you're used to version 30 or previous making UCSs, if you used the 3 points in the past, if you picked all 3 points, so after you clicked all 3 points, the UCS was made. In this one, that UCS is still orange because it's not done yet. We haven't fully made it yet. So I'm going to just rename the UCS so we know what it is. I'm just going to call it holes UCS. And then I'm going to hit OK. And that's actually going to create that UCS. If I was to hit cancel at that point in time, it would have deleted the UCS that I was trying to create. And it's really frustrating, especially if you are stuck in that old, if you've been using the older system for so long. There's a few functions in here that, and we're going to look at a couple of them today, but like translate and rotate. You no longer have to confirm the geometry after you pick it. You just pick the geometry and tell it either the movement for the translate or the rotation angle. And I still catch myself hitting the OK button all the time when I don't need to. So just be careful. Just play around with it. When you miss a step, you'll probably pick it up pretty quick. So right here, I'm just going to go and change the radius to a 1/4 inch, and I'm just going to slap some holes on here just to show the difference. So now, because we're in a top plane UCS, or we're in our custom holes UCS, if I was to go and snap this arc right here, whoops, hold on. If I was to go snap this arc on here, there we go. Try that again. So 0.25. If I was to go and pick this arc or this point, if I wanted to extrude a cut through that with this arc, it's going to go straight down and through the part. Problem is, that's not true to that, that's not normal to that face, which there may be plenty of times that you have to drill holes like that. But in this case, I want these holes to go through at the same angle of this face. I want it to cut through on an angle. So instead of leaving it the way we got it there, what we do is we make a UCS and then we go snap our arcs on there. So now if we snap our arcs, they're going to match that angle that we have. Come on, give me that. There we go. And then so we can cancel out. So we have those two arcs right there, and then we can move them, extrude, cut them through, and we wouldn't have an issue. So there we go. The next thing I want to talk about, well, the UCS is, there's more to the UCS. Hold on, get back into there. So into the UCS, we also have a translate function. Now, translate's one that I actually use pretty often just because it's very easy to just move a plane. And sometimes where my part sits, if I know the distance, up to here, I might want to move a plane up or down depending on where it's sitting. And a lot of times it's going to be done with one of your custom planes. So if you go into the translate function, it's just going to ask you, where do you want to move this plane to? So we can go in and say, okay, the X, I'm going to leave X where it's at, but I want to lift my Z up. Let's just say 1 inch. That's not long enough. 1.5. I want to go right to the bottom edge of that. That's close enough. So that's going to create a plane. So now if I go ahead and hit OK, it's going to make that plane. So basically that location is now kind of the new 0. Anything that I draw is going to automatically go to there, but not down to the bottom of the stock where the old 0 was. So the UCS controls all of that stuff. So this is the wrong name, but it'll work. There's our 2. That's fine. So the next one we have is a planar face. Planar face is probably the most commonly used one, just because it's so easy to use. What you have to do is you just pick a face like so, and it's going to line up a UCS to that face, just like that. And when you like it, if you like it, I'm going to go ahead and say holes UCS. Let's just say this is a caps lock on. There we go. Planar UCS. There we go. And I'll just say OK. So that gives me that planar. Now the cylindrical face, if I go to my layers here, I did make a cylinder. A cylindrical face allows you to choose a cylinder, and then it's going to normalize off that cylinder to the top of the part. So what we'll see is we pick the cylinder, it figures out the X, the Y, as well as the Z. If you wanted to do the top and just let it figure it out, you can do that as a planar face, but a cylindrical face is to pick a rounded, a cylindrical piece of geometry. And then the last one is the rotate command. So I'm going to go back over to my UCS. I'm just going to go to my holes one that I made, this little junky one. Turn this back on real fast. Turn this little guy back on. And then I'm going to go to this one that I didn't rename, and I'm just going to say modify. Now from the modify point, we can actually go in and rotate this. So the geometry right now is not going to be anything. We're going to say rotate. So now the rotation is all here. It's just like the translate. We don't have any geometry to select. This is just the plane itself. How are we going to rotate it? So we could actually come in and say, I want to do a rotation angle of, let's say, around the y-axis. We'll say 45 degrees. And I don't think that's sitting at 45. So that brought me to 45. That brings me the opposite way. If you ever get the opposite, I want to go the other way. Let's go minus 45. See what that gives me. That's pretty, it's not close. So I don't know what degrees it is. I don't remember when I made that part, but probably 40 some degrees, 35 to 40. And yeah, so you can go there, or maybe it's a little bit steeper actually. So yeah, you can play around with that and just move the UCSs around. But really what you're going to be using these for is pretty much just whenever you need to work on a different side. This is also a good way to set up index systems. If you're ever doing any fourth axis and you got some indexing to do, you can set up a custom plane and then index. You can actually select the index off that plane. So UCSs are a big function. I would say more so when you get later into the software, when you're learning about more and more. But it is a very cool feature. And the rotation is just going to let you rotate an existing one. And then your user coordinate system down here is actually allows you to modify the coordinate system based on where the origin is. So I can move it around based on that. I could also tell it the direction. So I could say that my X direction is actually going this way and my Y direction is actually going this way. And that's just going to flip it around. So just like the 3 points, but without actually doing anything. If you left it on the snap point function and you just click the modify tab, you can go in and define everything about that UCS really without working too hard. So you just have to go pick lines that represent the X, the Y, and the Z. All right, excuse me. All right, so that gets rid of the UCS. Perfect. Next thing I want to talk about is the points. So where do we got? I don't think I got anything weird going on. All right, let's get rid of this stuff. So, oh no, we can go to this one. So points, there's been a lot of changes with a lot of these functions. What is the easiest way to create surfaces on the entire box, or do you have to planar each surface? Can you select an entire wireframe box? John, if you were to create a box out of 2D wireframe that was irregular and each side was a different, not different shape, but it was just irregular, you'd have to skin each side together and then stitch it using the utilities. No, it's under Create 3D now. Using the stitch surfaces to solid function. So you create the walls of the box. So any box, doesn't really matter. And then you would stitch it together to make it one. Hope that answered that. If you got more, let me know. I'll get more into that with you if you want later on. All right, so the points function. So everything kind of makes sense now. I kind of talked about it a little bit last week. I think there might be more of you guys in here from last week. I don't know how many of you guys were in here last week. So right here is the Create 2D tab. So just real quick, just so I can hammer it into everyone's head, the Create 2D tab is all about creating 2D geometry. All right. Create 3D is about creating 3D geometry. The important word here is the create part. It's not modifying existing geometry. It's creating new geometry. And so when we get into these create menus, that's what you're doing. You're making the geometry. The utilities is all about modifying geometry. So if you have certain pieces of geometry that you want to rotate, you want to translate, you want to mirror, those are modifications. They're not new geometry that's getting created. We're just modifying some of the existing older stuff. So just be aware of that. I'm going to go back to the Create 2D. So one thing you'll notice if you go back to version 30, I think there's 6 or 7 functions that are used when you're doing points. You got your point snap, point coordinate, point incremental, point sketch enter, or a bunch of them. So what we've done now is kind of combine some of that stuff. So right here, if I just click on this first one, it's point sketch / enter. So you could think of that as a sketch function, but also a coordinates function. So right here, if I come in, I can drag this point around with me and I can place it on things, or I can actually go in and just type exactly where I want to put this point. So what I can do, or one thing I can also do is I can use this to snap it onto specific areas. And I'll talk about that again in a second, the snapping of things. So if I want to snap a point onto this snap point, remember anything you were doing in the past with any sort of snapping was always jumping to a snap point. It's a snap point. It has to snap to a snap point. You couldn't just randomly sketch a point on a line unless you went in and did some sort of some sort of, I don't know, change to it beforehand. You'd have to break the line, or you'd have to use something like the points on entity to get it to a different position on the line. In this case, you still can't just randomly sketch on. I guess you can. You can't just go and click on lines now, and it'll just randomly sketch. It doesn't have to jump specifically to that one, but it'll also give you your snap points for just creating geometries, for just creating points. I've had a lot of guys that have called in for me, and I've talked to them about this in my trainings, as well as I've talked to a few of the tech guys that said this is becoming a bigger thing, is just when you're trying to sketch these points, there isn't really a function to tell it exactly where to go. There is no function for arc center anymore, which is kind of weird. There is, and I'll show it to you in a minute, but normally you'd have a button that says, I want to find the center of an arc, and that's what it's going to give me. But now the way you find it is you just hover over the arc, and then you click on the center point, and you're done. So it does make it a little bit easier, but it's definitely different. So be careful with it. Your coordinates are going to work the same way. They're all based off of our main coordinate system here. So just type in exactly where you want to put the point, and that's where it's going to go. Right here, we have a point from entities. Now, this has a few functions on it. So if you want just a single endpoint, so I'm going to uncheck the arc center. If I just want an entity endpoint, what you'll see is if I click on this line, I get two previews for a point there and a point there. Now, this is where this sketch function really comes in handy, because the sketch function, say I only needed a point on one side of that line. Well, the sketch function lets me put a point on just a single side of that line. But if I'm in this function here for the from entities, if I choose endpoint, it's going to give me a point at the end of every line that I choose. So just like that, it's going to give you a point at the end of them. Now, if I want the middle points as well, I could say entity middle point. Again, if you click these, though, it's giving you every middle point for every piece of geometry you selected, which can be a little bit tedious. It can be a little bit, well, it can be a little bit. It can be a lot more than you need. You know, if I was just trying to find where one of these points is, this is overkill. So if you are just trying to find a single point, or maybe just a couple, use the point sketch function, because then you can sketch and snap points wherever you want, and they'll jump onto the snap point, so it automatically jumps there. The other ones we have in here are like the arc center. So if I go ahead and pick this right here, I'm just going to pick all four of those, as well as this big arc right here. And if I say arc center, what we'll see is the points show up for all the arcs there, as well as, you can't see it, but there is going to be a point. It's very faint. There's an orange point there in the center of the main arc, which is the 3-inch radius arc there. And so we have our center points. We also have intersections. So this is where we could find out the intersection of all these pieces. So if you wanted to limit it, what you could do is just say, what's the intersection between this arc and this line and this line? Let me actually click them. And you'll see the points will show up on there. If I pick another line that connects to it, it's telling me that this line intersects that line at that position. The other option we have is called intersection on extension. So when you click this one, it's going to give you an intersection. If this line was extended any longer, it would give you the point for where it would connect on the other side. So in this case, because we're using an arc and we can hit it on both sides, it's intersecting on the top, and then on the extension, it's intersecting down here and here. So there's all the geometry for that. The next function we have is pretty standard. It's our incremental function. So if you have a point, well, really, let me explain. The difference is with the sketch enter function, every entered point that I define, so if I say put one at x1, y1, it's based off of this location being 0. So it puts my point there. When we get into the incremental function, we're no longer looking at that point in the middle. We're not looking at the origin of the BobCAD actual CAD software. We're picking the 0 location is essentially what we're doing. So if I say let's move over 1 by 1, same numbers, what should end me right there. If I go ahead and click on this, let me update that. There we go. We will see it's moving over 1 inch and then up 1 inch, just like that. So the incremental lets me choose kind of the 0 location, and then from that 0 location that I choose, I can move a specific distance in X, Y, Z, wherever I got to go. And real nice function. The point on entity is just the exact same. This is the best way. If you're just trying to find a single center point for a line, this is the best way to do it. You go to percentage, leave it at 50%, and then click on the line you want to put the point on. It'll snap a point at the 50% mark, and yeah, you'll always find the middle point there. You could also do, well, one thing with this to remember, it's a percentage. I cannot tell you how many phone calls I've handled where someone calls in and they're saying, yeah, I'm trying to go in and put a point a quarter of the way down the line. And when they go and do that, they just keep getting a point down at the end of the line there. And what's going on, it's not actually at the end of the line. It's a quarter of 1% up the line, because the problem most people do is I don't work with whole numbers very often. If I do, it's going to be ones and twos for 1 inch and 2 inch and stuff. But when I'm defining tools and I'm defining radiuses and I'm just defining these decimals all the time, my hand just automatically types 0.25 instead of 25 like it's supposed to. So if that's the case, if you ever do draw one, you don't need to call tech support. It's just look at your number. It's always got to be a whole number. So if you want a quarter, it's 25%. It's out of 100 here. So because that's how percentages work. There we go. Now we have one up a quarter of the way up the line. 25%. Yeah, like I said, that's probably one of the biggest functions that I've seen problems with out of these ones. See, the next one's a distance. Now, the distance isn't a percentage of anything. So I have to go in and I have to set up a specific distance and move it up and down based on whatever that distance is. So I'm just going to come in and say, give me a 1/2 inch. And so if I go and click on this line here, it's just going to put a point a 1/2 inch up, which that line's 1 inch long. So right in the center. That's a good use for it, but usually that's not what I use it for. My main use for the distance is when I'm working on lines that have an angle. So like this right here. If I wanted to extend this line by let's say a 1/4 inch in either direction, I want a 1/2 inch longer. What I'd do is I'd come in and I'd set up my distance, but I'd make it a negative 1/4 of an inch. And then I hover over the sides. Now, depending on which side you click on will determine which side this point goes to. So I'm going to go ahead and click right here. And what we'll see is because I clicked on this side, so really what we need, let me put oh, look, we could just do this right there. Ain't that convenient? So we put a midpoint on it. So that midpoint there is the determining factor on whether or not we get a point to go, out this way or out that way, because it just is whichever side of the midpoint we're on. So if I click over here, I'm on the right side of that midpoint, it's going to extend it out. Now, the reason this is a cool function is because normally I would have to calculate that point to find out where it would be at exactly a 1/4 of an inch away, which there's ways of doing it. There's a bunch of ways, but this is a very easy way, because now I can go and extend this line just by jumping up to my utilities. I can say trim one entity and make this line that long. And so that works out perfect. And it's the same exact angle. The line's just a little bit longer. So that's a really good way to extend lines. I use that a lot on tricky geometry when I'm doing just engraving and stuff. And I just want to be able to extend. I want to draw my own leads. I just extend the line however much I'd normally add in for the lead in. And it's a real easy way to do that. You can modify an entity, just so you guys know. If you go in, hold on, let me go back to this guy and just pick a line here. Hold on, I got something sticking around here. That's fine. Home. All right, so if I pick this line, let's just jump back to something we can actually see. Select mode right there. So I pick the line, right click. Right here we have entity modify. Now this is another one of these very overlooked features, I'd say. I showed it to a guy just the other day who's been using the software for a long time, and he didn't know it was there. So if this is new to you, this is a really cool function. The thing is, version 31 kind of took care of a lot of the problems that I used to have. Now when we modify a line, it actually lets us change the length. So I could say make it 0.25. It's going to keep it the same angle. The difference is it's going to keep the start point where it's at and then just really extend on the end point if it needs to. So you can just type in your length, make your change, hit OK, and there it is, all changed. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that thing now. The next one I want to look at, is there anything else under points? Let me just look. Last one's point perpendicular. Allows me to take a point and snap it onto an object perpendicularly. So if I was to draw a line between this point here and this point here, and this was a straight line here, that would equal out to a 90-degree angle on both sides of that line. So perfectly perpendicular. Not many reasons to use that one, or not too often do I even use that one, But the times that I have needed to use it, or the times that I have gotten the chance to use it, it's been a great function to be able to use. Little things like just moving a part straight over, but not knowing the distance. I could just snap a point on the part, a known location. I can then use the point perpendicular to create another known location a certain distance away without me having to know the distance. And then I can take a measurement and translate parts. Really depends. It's probably one of the least used functions out of there, but it is a very cool function. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of my snap points or all these points that I got on the screen. And this is nothing part of the entire training or webinar that we have, but it is a function that I always like to talk about. So you guys, over the next however long we keep these webinars going, hopefully forever, right? For however long, I'm probably going to talk about this toolbar all the time because it's just it's just a really, really convenient toolbar to have and to use. I think I used it probably 5 or 6 times just this morning, just to pick geometry a little quicker. So what this toolbar allows you to do is change your selection masking. I'll do more on that later. Let's keep going with this. I'll talk more about the selection mask, but basically what it would let me do is pick all these points very quickly, and I'm just not going to delete them because we're going to move on to another feature here. So the lines function. The lines function hasn't, it's changed in a lot of ways. The bigger thing that most people have noticed right off the start is there's a lot of functionality that seems to be missing from the line function. So we don't have a line join anymore, which is one of the biggest reasons I ever used lines. But then the sketch function. So the sketching ability that we had in the past wasn't that good. If you wanted to join 2 points together or 2 lines together, you had to use the line join function. But now if I go in, I can actually click on a point and say, I want to go there. And again, our construction geometry will pop up. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off because it's kind of annoying. And so you'll see we still have our full range of sketch. It did snap onto the point, which is huge. In the previous versions, the sketch function didn't snap onto points. Or at least it wouldn't always snap. Sometimes you'd get lucky and get it close, but for the most part, it wouldn't snap. It was not a good way to create a line that joined between 2 locations. So the nice thing is, if I sketch I don't sketch lines very often unless we're doing some Bob art. If someone hands me a print, there's not much ability to sketch on most prints. So I usually don't get the chance to. But with this one, what's cool is you can lock onto a point. And then from here, you can sketch, which for me using Bob art, that's a huge deal because a lot of times when I am sketching, it's just for Bob art to recreate some lines or redraw some geometry or put some new geometry in. But I have a known location that I want to start from. And in the past, in the previous versions, the only function you could do that with was a continuous sketch, which really doesn't make too big of a difference. It's about the same as this, but it's pretty cool. So right there, we can go in, we can sketch our lines just by typing them in. So we can also click and lay down a point. And then what's cool about the lines, and this has been around for a few years now, but I think a lot of people can always use a refresher on it. When you click on the line, you'll notice the difference in color between this line and this line. This line, I can still modify. This darker one's still modifiable. So I can come in and say, okay, the length is 2.5. Ooh, not 25, 2.5. And the angle, I want it to be a clean 290 degrees. Let's see if it actually changed. Let's say 270. That didn't change at all. Oh, it's the endpoints I got to switch. Let's do this. Okay, there we go. So I got to hit OK to make it confirm. So there we go. So you can redefine them. You could actually just come in and start typing the line as well. So if you came in and said the length is 1 inch, it's starting at 0, and we want to end it. Now the end is pretty cool because you have the choice of either doing an absolute value or an incremental value. Now, because I'm starting from XYZ 0, these numbers are going to be the same. But if I was going to say, let's start at x1 minus x1 minus 1y, and then see where we go, we're starting the start point there. And so now what we'll see is the increment. I don't know why my preview's not popping up, but now the increment is going to get me to x1, y0. It's got to go 2 inches in X and 1 inch in Y incrementally from where we start. And if I hit OK, it'll pop up, but my preview is not showing up. It's something. I don't think I turned anything off. I'll probably need a restart, but there we go. So that's the line sketch kind of functionality. Next to that, we still have the continuous sketch, which works a lot like the previous one, the sketch enter right here. This one works pretty good. It's just a line enter, so you could still put in your line, tell it the start point. But you can also go in and make modifications just like we did before. Right here, we have a line tangent. Let me jump back to this guy here. Line tangent just lets me make a line that's tangent. This one works pretty much the same way as it did in the previous version. So if I say line tangent, all I have to do is click from this arc here to this arc over here. It's going to give me a line that's tangent. If we wanted to pick specific points, we could do that as well. You can have this trim entities. I usually don't let the trimming happen when I'm doing a tangent, just because sometimes it'll get rid of more than I want to. I usually do my tangent lines and then trim manually what I need just by using a quick trim. It seems to be a little bit easier for us, or for me at least. And then next to that, we have our parallel. So parallel works just about the same, except it does have a few more settings. So with this, I can pick a line and say, I want to be parallel to that line. Now, the way it works by default is if you go a distance, it takes this distance, and that's as far as you're allowed to go in either direction. The way it determines which direction you're going is where your cursor is. So you always want to pay attention to your preview on this one. You want that preview to show up on the proper side of the geometry. So we have just moving the cursor, the ability to move it. To create the actual line and finish it, you just click. And now we have two lines, and it's perfectly parallel to the other. The next function we have is side only. So side only lets it move sideways, will not move up and down, but it'll keep that thing moving however far I want it to. So if you're just trying to sketch something, I use this a lot for constructing some sort of box around a part that I may need to make, just a box around the part. I can start out with one line, drag it over side only. That way they stay parallel at the top and bottom. So I just have to draw a line between the top and bottom and work with it that way. And then again, just like the other one, to actually create it, you just have to click, and there it is. The last one's a free drag. So what it does is it keeps the line parallel, but it allows you to drag it wherever you want. So the line is still sitting in the same direction. It's just now you're able to move it wherever you want. So I don't really mess with that one. This is more of a sketch feature, and I don't really sketch too much. So that's why I don't use it. And so that's really it. Is there anything else on the lines? Oh, line at an angle. That's just you coming in, you tell it the angle. It's the same as previous versions. Really nothing new except the look. Next one we're going to look at is the arcs. This will probably take us to the end. I got a lot more to cover next week. This is going to be great. All right, cool. So we have our functions. Now, one big thing that they changed was a lot of the sketching functions got a bit bigger. Hold on. Grid 1 inch. Oh, yeah. Okay. So it pretty much gives us a lot more sketch functionality. So right here we have our radius. We can define how large it is. So we just say 1 inch, or let's go 1.5. And that's going to kind of lock it in place. We can tell it exactly where to go. And then we have our start and end angle. Now, the big thing with this is if you look at this function, the way I would usually say this is comparable to the previous versions. This is like a snap function combined with the coordinates function. Because you can go in and just snap it onto a point. So it'll always snap onto points. It'll also let you do multi-picking. So multi-picking is really nice if you have a bunch of points on the screen and you need an arc for every single one. The multi-point sketch, you just pick all the points and it throws a arc on every single one of them, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to open up, let me get rid of the lines on this junk here and go back in. Now we got a blank window. So the rest of these functions are primarily, and I won't say fully, but primarily they're going to be used for sketching. So arc 2 points lets me define an arc based on the radius. So I'm defining where the center point is. And then from there, I'm dragging the radius until I get whatever size I want. So just like that. The next one we have allows me to define the diameter. So I'm defining this here, and then I could go down to this here. So I'm defining, that's a 1 inch radius. Those are the same size arcs, but on this one, I only had to define half. On this one, I define the full thing. Right here, we have a 3 points center endpoints option. So what we have is 3 points. So we pick all three of them, or you sketch first. So we're sketching kind of the radius. And then with this line here, you can drag how much of that radius you actually want. Depending on which way you go from, you can choose. So I could say, let's go back to right there. What's cool is that's not over yet. So I could say, you know what? I wanted to start at 0. So I can enter a 0 there. And we'll see that update. And I wanted it to go to 150. So I wasn't that close. But there we go. And the cool thing is if that was the wrong way to do the entire part, I could say, give me the other half of that as well, and it'll give me whatever's left on the other side. Then we hit OK. The next one we have is 3 entities. So we just click 1, we click 2, and then we can drag in kind of the center point for that part. So you're defining kind of the endpoints and then the radius, really. You're just telling it the actual curve to that. And then the next one is the normal 3-point entity. I like to use points for this one, so I'm just going to go 1 there, 1 there, 1 there. If you got 3 known locations and all you're trying to do is put a point through all 3 of them, you just go arc 3 entities. We go 1, number 2, number 3, and it'll create that arc, and then we hit OK, and there we have it. And then the last one is fit arc. So for this one, I'm going to open up a new one, and I'm going to show you this one. Even if you know what it is, I apologize. I've had probably 4 or 5 guys that have gotten in touch with tech support over the past week or so, and the geometry that they're sending it looks good, but there's weird little tiny breaks inside of it. And it's just, and then the arcs, there's just weird stuff going on with the geometry. I will say a lot of it's coming from BobArt. So BobArt's always a fun one because there's always a weird bit going on. But so you have BobArt that does it. The bigger thing is trying to load in, the one we were looking at yesterday was an EPS file. So it's an Adobe Illustrator file or something, some sort of art drawing software. Yeah, there is no, there's just no good way. It's just not a good part. That's all it was. They can be very good. An EPS file can be very good. The ones we've been getting lately have been garbage. So what we've been able to do is you open them up, and they're just broken up into a whole bunch of weird arcs, weird splines in a lot of them, just a lot of weird. So what we've been able to do is under the Utilities tab, there's an explode function. And now explode allows you to explode text, arcs, splines, contours, and point masks. So the 2 things that I really want to explode when I'm doing any of this stuff with BobArt, or what I've been doing lately, is I have to explode the arcs and I have to explode the line or the splines. In this case, I don't have any splines, but I do have an arc. So if I was to just click on this and hit OK, not much is going to happen because we are still creating arcs. So if I uncheck this button, now we're going to create line segments. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this and then hit OK. So you'll have this in a few cases. Once in a while, and not too often, but if you get DXF files, they may show up. Nick Jones, how am I zooming in and out? Sorry, guys, one question. Nick, I'm just using my mouse wheel, in and out. If you don't have a mouse wheel, you'll want to get a mouse with a wheel on it. But yeah, that's just the mouse wheel. If it's not working, let me know afterwards. All right, so the fit arcs option. So basically the explode function lets me break this arc into a whole bunch of line segments. So I'm going to go ahead and break it now. I already did. Okay, good. And if we right click and go down to my entity summary, we'll see where we would have had just a single arc earlier, we have 141 line segments now, which that equates to 141 separate lines of G code, which is real messy. So what I want to do is I want to rebuild this arc. So again, 2 times you'll use this: DXF files and a lot of these Illustrator, PDF, kind of these weirder files, these vector files, I'll call them, because that's what they are. They open up like that. So you won't be able to do this on every part that you do, and it really is kind of a scalable function. But I'm going to go to Create 2D. I'm going to go to Arc. If you want to go directly to the fit arcs without opening the arc menu first, you can click the drop down at the bottom. All these little arrows are drop downs. We could say fit arcs. I got fit arcs. Now right here is my tolerance. By default, the tolerance is always going to pop up at 4/10. And if I was to go and drag a box over my part right now and right click and hit OK, all I'm trying to do is rebuild this arc. It was 141 line segments before. I want it to be a lot less than that. So we'll see right now we went down from 141. We still have 4 lines on there somewhere, but we have 20 arcs. So it's getting cleaner. It's just not as clean as we'd want. So right here, I'm going to just go and change the tolerance. I'm going to drop it to 4 thou. And then I'm going to hit undo 1 time so we go back. So we have, if we look at the summary, 141 line segments. Then I'm going to go ahead and drag a box over the whole part. and then hit OK. So now we'll see we created, it says arcs created 1, but it doesn't tell us about the lines, if it did fix any lines or if it didn't create any lines. So after we're done with that, always go into your entity summary. Just right click, entity summary. Here it is. We're back to 1 arc, and we can go ahead and hit OK. It's not just, they actually did some work to this. I don't know if it was in version 31 or version 30, but I remember back in version 29, if you went with a 4/10 value for your tolerance, it would not create a single arc. You'd always get 2. So they definitely optimized it a little bit more to even fix that. The biggest problem people run into with this kind of stuff is one biggest problem I'd say is people just don't realize that this fit arcs option is even here. And then so what people end up trying to do to fix it is they go to the utilities and they start running this cleanup and optimize. Cleanup and optimize does not redraw arcs. It doesn't fix arcs. Now, if I was to just, for whatever reason, go in and divide this arc into 141 pieces, like I'm doing right now, if I was to look at the entity summary now, we have 141, but they're not line segments. They're arc segments. So we have our arc segment 141. Now the cleanup and optimize can do its job because those arc segments all have the same radius. They just have different start and end points. So the cleanup and optimize, I can go in, I can say home, I select all, and then I right click and hit OK. And if I go and touch that arc right here, we now have one single arc entity. So it fixes it. It also erases doubles, which I just found out about a couple months ago. It's been longer than a couple months, probably close to a year ago. But for the longest time, I was using the utilities and doing a cleanup and optimize and an erase doubles on everything. Cleanup and optimize does erase doubles, but you'd only use erase doubles when you don't want to also rebuild the geometry. So pretty much cleanup and optimize is the function you're going to use all the time. Erase doubles is just when you think you got duplicates. So there we go. And that's pretty much where we're going to end it today. I'm going to go through the splines and rectangles and stuff. There's not too much for those. There's not too much new stuff with that. But I wanted to get I want to knock out these basics so you guys are all, let's say basically there. And then in either next week or in the next couple weeks, we will have some CAM stuff coming up. So like I said, if you guys have any ideas of anything you want to see in the future during one of these webinars, just shoot us an email, support@bobcad.com. If you just type in the subject line, just webinar idea, and give us the whole thing, I will. Ron, if you stick around for 1 second, I will show you that masking tool if you'd like to see it. Just stick around in a minute. So other than that, you guys have a good week. I have a training that I will be doing for sure next week. We'll either have me or Al on here, or not me. I'm doing a training. It's still at the office, but it's not one of these seminars. I have someone coming in.